Hey everybody, welcome to our video series, The Scientific Principles of Weightlifting. This is our fifth video in our installment, Principle of Variation. So what is the principle of variation? Really what we're talking about is the strategic changes to training in order to magnify the long-term training effect. So this is any kind of change from the training program you are doing or any kind of variables that change that actually produce or magnify the actual long-term effect. These can be things that change the program enough that you avoid staleness or prevent injury, et cetera, et cetera. Something that we need to be aware of here is the difference and the contrast between directed adaptation or specificity, meaning we need to do the thing we're trying to do. If that's snatch a 1 rep max or clean and jerk 1 rep max in competition, we have to do that and activities very, very similar to that in order to become better at it. Versus adaptive resistance, where we have to, if we do those same things over and over and over again, we'll develop a resistance to that stimulus. So specificity is always number one, and we know that because of the previous videos. We know that specificity is going to be the underlying foundation for all the further training decisions. So we can't supersede specificity because we're trying to avoid any kind of adaptive resistance. Let's look at how we can create variation. Specificity versus variation. The most specific thing an Olympic weightlifter can do is a 1 rep max snatch, 1 rep max clean and jerk. Any deviation from that is variation, whether that be snatch without a hook grip, or whether that be 2 repetitions of snatch, or whether that be 3 cleans plus 1 jerk. Those are all variations of specificity, of the actual exercise, the competition exercise we're performing. Let's look at how we create variation through the use of volume. So in a broader spectrum, changes in volume, changes in the overall volume, the total volume from phase to phase or from week to week, month to month, will have an effect on variation because we're doing more than we were before. There's a change in the actual stimulus on the body. This kind of leaks into the idea of phase potentiation, in that certain phases are going to be different in magnitude, and those effects are going to transfer to other phases. Intensity. Changes in the actual intensity, absolute weight on the bar, the intensity of the lift will also have an effect on variation. Snatches and clean and jerks with 1 rep maximum weights is completely specific. Less intensity, somewhere in the 65 to, or anything up to 100%, for more repetitions, or even for just the same number of repetitions but with lower intensity, it's going to have a different effect. There's variation there because we're using a lighter intensity than what is used in competition. Exercise selection. This is kind of the more classical or sort of most well-known form of variation, is that we may use maximum intensities, we may use the same volumes and training stimulus we have before, but the exercise is different. Changing the position of the lift, snatches from blocks, snatches from the hang, any number, 100 variations for each of these lifts, clean and jerks from deficit, etc. Changing the structure of how the lift is executed will have an effect on it being less specific and having more variation. Let's look at the proper application of variation. Most important is the strategic timing of when we have changes to the program that create variation. It's important that these times don't conflict with the process of training. We're not trying to change the variations or create variation and violate specificity, so we wouldn't have a large variation in things like the peaking phase or the week or two before a competition. There's no need to try to prevent adaptive resistance then, because we know that specificity is the most important factor or the most important principle in training. The directed adaptation of being very, very good at a 1 rep max snatch and a 1 rep max clean and jerk supersedes all else. Looking at the other proper application of variation, the exercises need to be based on athletes' needs. It's extremely important that the variations we choose, while removed from specificity to some degree, do affect the athlete's weaknesses. If you look into my book, Weightlifting Technique Triad, we break down the technique of the Olympic lifts into 3 basic components: relative height of the bar, trajectory of the bar, and the time to fixation. Looking at those 3 components, you could determine which one of those components is being overdeveloped or underdeveloped, and what exercises will fall into place to bring that up to an equal level to round out the athlete's technique. So someone who has an extremely high relative height of the bar, they power snatch or power clean way more than they can squat clean or squat snatch. When they choose variations of the exercises, they're going to want to avoid exercises that are already augmenting the strengths they have. They're going to want to choose an exercise that maybe augments the time to fixation, which would be something like a hang snatch or a block snatch, something that forces that athlete to be faster under the bar. And the same can be said for the general exercises too. If someone has very weak legs, very strong back, they need to spend more energy on those general exercises like squatting versus pulling exercises. Let's look at some of the pitfalls here with variation. An under-application of variation. In an under-application of variation in the training program, we're going to basically have a situation where the athlete is doing basically the same training month to month, week to week, possibly even year to year. They're doing the same sets and reps or the same total volume in a month or any cycle. They're using a very narrow band of intensity zones, so maybe they're only training with near maximum and maximum intensities, and they're possibly not having any exercise variation that maybe allows them to train weaknesses. Doing no variations or having no variations can lead to staleness, to injury, to lack of progress, and I can attest to this from my own experience with the Bulgarian method, squatting many, many times a day to the same intensity, maximum weights, 1 rep maxes, multiple times a day, no volume, no change in exercise selection, and no change in the use of different intensities led me to have really fast progress initially in the exercises we did, front squat, snatch, clean and jerk, power snatch, power clean and jerk, but very, very long stalled progress after that initial change in training. So first 6 weeks were amazing, hit big PRs and everything. The next 6 years took my squat up another 20 kilos, which was really a dismal amount considering the amount of time and effort that went into it. There was definitely a situation where you could see adaptive resistance. The same loads, same intensities, same reps and sets didn't produce the same results they did initially. Another pitfall, really the over-application of variation. This is probably a little bit more common, I think, for people because there's often a sense that you need to change. This is kind of beaten into people's heads that you need to change the routine and continually do this. Or you have people that are maybe coming from a CrossFit background that really just choose to do lots of different exercises or get bored with something very quickly. So changing too often is going to violate directed adaptation. If you're always doing a different variation of the snatch and clean and jerk or a different variation of squatting or different exercises, constantly rotating these things, you're never going to have a chance to develop any kind of stimulus in that exercise. There's no specificity because all of your training load is spread across different variations that are not directed at increasing the 1 rep max snatch, 1 rep max clean and jerk. The lack of specificity and strategic timing in exercise selection, changing these exercises too late into a training program, the last 2-3 weeks, the last month in the peaking phase of a training cycle, if you're changing the exercises dramatically or frequently, you won't have the same level of technical prowess going in. You're not, again, you're violating the directed adaptation, you're violating specificity, you're going to have a less than optimal performance. Oftentimes, I think the difference between these two, between under-application and over-application, in over-application, it's less likely that people are going to become injured, become stale. They're going to end up in a situation where they don't make a lot of progress. There's so much variation, there's so much change, nothing can really be developed. Versus the under-application, in which there's too much of the same stimulus, can oftentimes result in the same staleness, but it does lend itself, I think, a little bit more to becoming, developing an injury or more severe stagnation of the results because now you've exhausted your ability to improve because you've done the same exact things over and over and over again. If you guys like this video, go ahead and subscribe. If you're interested in any more information or the other phases in our Scientific Principles of Weightlifting video series, go ahead and check out jtsstrength.com.